Clint Eastwood has acted in more than 50 films and directed more than 24. Amazing performances from his actor Clint Eastwood has reached that point.
You've got another trophy for your collection, I see.
Lone Rider drifts across a dusty plain, hat pulled low and eyes set in an iron squint.
I always believe in moving forward with whatever I'm doing, and whatever the impressions are, I only go by the response to the films in general.
In the distance, a mournful harmonica and the jangle of spurs herald the arrival of a new kind of hero. This is the world of Clint Eastwood's westerns, a landscape of frontier justice, moral ambiguity, and enduring legend. From television screens to the wild plains of Spain and the sagebrush of the American West.
Make an Italian, German, Spanish co-production of a remake of a Japanese film in the plains of Spain, and I said not particularly.
Eastwood's journey through the Western genre is as epic as any tale from the Old West. He was not the typical white-hatted cowboy of earlier decades. Instead, with a cigar clenched in his teeth and a poncho draped over his shoulder, Eastwood forged a different path.
Well, I would prefer to probably ignore anything I really hated.
I'll see you in hell, wait, money.
That of the enigmatic anti-hero who would redefine what it meant to be a cowboy on film. Over a career spanning more than half a century, Clint Eastwood's name became synonymous with Western cinema. He rode into our imaginations as the man with no name in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns.
The greatest scriptwriter of westerns.
And later as a grizzled outlaw-turned-director crafting his own tales of revenge and redemption.
I was always curious about the directors and curious about how they were. Finally, one day I started thinking, I had to try this myself.
His Western films not only revitalized a genre that was beginning to grow stale, but they also mirrored his own growth from up-and-coming actor to Oscar-winning filmmaker.
In the last 3 decades, he has made 35 films through it, starting in 33 of them and directing 20 of them himself, the one we know as Clint Eastwood.
This documentary explores Eastwood's Western film career, from the early days on the range, through the Italian revolution of the spaghetti Western, and onward to the bold American Westerns he headlined and helmed. It's a tale of how a Hollywood outsider became an iconic gunslinger.
An Italian concept of what a Western slang would be. So that a lot of the dialogue was a little bit on the shaky side.
How the Western myth itself was reshaped in his image, and how Clint Eastwood rode off into the cinematic sunset, leaving an indelible legacy.
See, in this world, there's two kinds of people, my friend. Those with loaded guns, and those who dig. You dig.
Clint Eastwood's Western story begins not on the big screen, but on the modest plains of 1950s television. In those days, Westerns ruled the airwaves, and a young Eastwood, tall, laconic, and ruggedly handsome, found his footing in the genre almost by happenstance. After a few uncredited bit parts in films, including a fleeting appearance in a 1956 B-movie Western that he would later jokingly call the lousiest Western ever made.
I just did a lot of bits, and then Ambush at Cimarron Pass came much later.
Eastwood landed a role that would change his fortunes.
What do you think, Mr. Favor?
In 1959, he was cast in the CBS TV series Rawhide as Rowdy Yates, the eager young cowboy second in command on a cattle drive. For 8 seasons, American families saw Eastwood every week astride a horse, cutting the figure of a Western cowboy. Rawhide was a hit, a classic TV Western full of cattle stampedes, outlaw encounters, and the rough-and-tumble life on the trail. The show's success made Eastwood a recognizable face, if not yet a household name.
Clint, of course, needs no introduction.
As Rowdy Yates, he was the loyal right-hand man, quick with a smile and quicker with a gun when needed. but always deferential to the trail boss played by Eric Fleming.
I told you when the time was right, I was going to ride out. Well, you were a long time coming back.
It paid the bills and then some. Suddenly the Eastwood family had a house with a swimming pool. But after years of driving cattle on screen, Clint Eastwood grew restless. By the early 60s, Eastwood was itching for bigger horizons. He watched contemporaries like Steve McQueen and James Garner successfully leap from television to movie stardom and wondered if he could do the same. The Western film genre, however, was in a transitional phase. The Hollywood Western, once a juggernaut, was beginning to show its age. Traditional Westerns often presented clear-cut heroes in white hats and villains in black, morality tales where good triumphed neatly over evil. Eastwood had cut his teeth on that all-American style, but he was about to be pulled into an entirely different kind of Western adventure. One that would take him across the ocean and into uncharted territory for a young American actor. Little did he know destiny was about to call him with an offer from Italy that would transform him from a TV cowboy into an international film icon.
I'm going to get a trip to Italy and Spain. I've never been to either place. It's going to be a fine experience.
In 1963, Clint Eastwood received an unusual script and an even more unusual invitation.
The part wasn't as spare as that in the script.
An Italian filmmaker named Sergio Leone was planning a Western to be shot in Europe.
Sergio Leone is remembered today as the man who reshaped the American West.
An idea almost unheard of at the time, and needed an American lead. Eastwood's rawhide co-star Eric Fleming was actually offered the part first, but he turned it down, wary of a low-budget Western filmed in Spain by an Italian director.
Italian cinema is very poor.
Several other better-known actors also declined.
We got Clint for $15,000. Coburn wanted $25,000.
The project sounded risky, even absurd. When the offer finally came to Eastwood, he saw an opportunity rather than a gamble.
And I looked at the bridge and I looked at the distance between it. I said, Sergio, where are you going to be? He says, well, I'll be right here and right behind this camera waiting for you, right where you come in. I said, fine, if you'll be there, I said, then I'll do it.
Italy to make a Western, he mused. It certainly seemed a far cry from Hollywood. But Eastwood was intrigued by the script's inspiration. The story was a reimagining of Yojimbo, one of his favorite Japanese samurai films. The idea of transplanting a samurai's tale to the Old West piqued his interest. Besides, as Eastwood would later wryly note, he figured at the very least he'd get a free trip to Spain out of the deal. So Eastwood packed his boots, hopped on a plane to Rome, and then made his way to the sun-baked plains of Spain's Andalusia region. The film was titled A Fistful of Dollars, released in 1964. And it would become the first of the now legendary Dollars trilogy. On set, Eastwood encountered a filmmaking style unlike anything in California. Sergio Leone spoke little English, and Clint spoke no Italian.
Sergio didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak any Italian when I first went over there.
A translator was needed for basic communication. The budget was shoestring, meaning Eastwood even had to provide much of his own costume.
I did bring a lot of my own equipment. I just bought some jeans. I brought the boots I wore on rawhide and brought most of the wardrobe with me. We picked up a few things in Spain.
Piecing together what would become the signature look of his character. The weather-beaten boots, the flat-brimmed hat, and that poncho. A garment that soon achieved iconic status in its own right. Under the scorching Spanish sun, a new kind of cowboy was being born. Eastwood's character in A Fistful of Dollars was unlike the clean-cut heroes of rawhide. Here he portrayed a nameless drifter, Joe to some, but known forever to audiences as the man with no name. This mysterious gunslinger wanders into a lawless border town torn by two feuding families. Rather than picking a side like a traditional hero might, he cynically plays both sides against each other, profiting from the chaos. He is cool, cunning, and unapologetically mercenary. The film's very premise, loosely adapted from Yojimbo, upended the conventions of the Western genre.
I always loved Yojimbo, so that's what inspired me to take the project.
In this harsher vision of the West, there were no clear good guys or bad guys. Everyone had a price or a secret agenda. Eastwood, with his steely gaze and sparse dialogue, was the perfect vessel for this morally ambiguous anti-hero. He spoke little, partly by his own choice. He and Leone trimmed down the character's lines to make him more enigmatic, and instead let action and attitude define him. A curl of smoke from his cheroot, a silent shrug, or a deadly squint conveyed more than pages of dialogue ever could.
Sergio Leone agreed that we'd try to make this guy a little bit unique. You're not quite sure who he is. You're not even quite sure he's the hero.
A Fistful of Dollars became a surprise hit, first in Italy and later across Europe. When it eventually reached American shores a few years later, audiences were electrified. Here was a Western that felt entirely fresh. The film was brutal and stylish, flavoured with operatic music and an ironic tone. Ennio Morricone's unforgettable score, laced with whistles, gunshot cracks and haunting guitars, added to the film's unique atmosphere. Sergio Leone's camera lingered in extreme close-up on Eastwood's eyes, then swung wide to capture sweeping vistas of desolate land, a dramatic contrast that built almost unbearable tension in the climactic gunfights. Critics coined the term spaghetti western to describe this new breed of European western, and it wasn't initially meant kindly, yet the term stuck and soon became a badge of honour for a whole subgenre. Eastwood, for his part, had become an international star almost overnight.
Well, Clint Eastwood is one of a handful of extraordinary actors to have found success in front and behind the camera.
He reprised The Man with No Name in For a Few Dollars More a year later, this time teamed with Lee Van Cleef as a rival-turned-partner bounty hunter. The sequel gave Eastwood more room to refine the character. With a bigger budget and growing confidence, the film escalated the action and the intrigue. Eastwood's quiet cool played off Van Cleef's steely elegance, and together they created one of cinema's great Western duos. By now, Eastwood's poncho-wearing drifter had evolved into the very definition of the anti-hero. Deadly yet principled in his own peculiar way, and always ready with a terse one-liner or a knowing smirk amid the mayhem. Then came the capstone of the trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, released in late 1966 in Europe and eventually in the United States in 1967. This epic western, really more of a darkly comic war film meets treasure hunt, solidified the spaghetti western's place in cinema history. Eastwood again donned the mantle of the good, though his character, Blondie, was only virtuous in comparison to his amoral counterparts. Lee Van Cleef returned, this time as a truly villainous figure, the Bad, and Eli Wallach joined as the conniving, comical bandit, Tuco, the Ugly. Together they chased a fortune in gold against the backdrop of the American Civil War. The film was grand in scope, featuring sprawling Civil War battle scenes and that legendary three-way standoff in a circular cemetery, and rich with Leone's trademark tension and style. In that iconic final duel, Eastwood stands poncho-clad at the centre of a cemetery arena, finger twitching near his revolver, eyes narrowed to slits against the sun. No words are spoken, none are needed. The close-ups of his weathered face intercut with those of his adversaries, all set to Morricone's heart-pounding score, said everything about the deadly stakes. When the gunsmoke cleared, Eastwood's Blondie had further etched the image of the Western anti-hero into popular culture. The Dollars trilogy was more than just a series of hits.
Eli and myself, I had just met Eli. Sergio Leone had just cast him in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And we went over to Spain and went to all these wonderful towns. Eli, can you come up here?
It was a revolution in Western filmmaking. These films tossed aside the polish of Hollywood Westerns and embraced grit, irony and violence in a way that felt startling and modern. They demythologized the Old West, showing it not as a place of noble sheriffs and righteous settlers, but as a rough, morally grey frontier where survival often trumped honor. For Eastwood, this was the turning point. He had taken a role that established stars wouldn't touch and turned it into pure gold. By the end of the 1960s, Clint Eastwood was firmly established as a global movie star, the new face of the Western genre. The Man with No Name had made Eastwood's name famous. Now, armed with that success, he returned to America poised to take even greater control of his career and eager to prove that the spaghetti western was no fluke, but rather just the beginning of his legend. With the spaghetti westerns cementing his stardom, Clint Eastwood headed back to Hollywood in the late 1960s, carrying a bit of European swagger and a newfound clout. American studios, initially hesitant about those Italian upstarts, were now keen to cash in on the Man with No Name phenomenon. Eastwood wasted no time. In 1968, he starred in Hang 'em High, his first American western as a leading man. The film's very title promised frontier justice of the starkest kind, and it delivered. Eastwood played Jed Cooper, a man wrongly lynched by a posse who miraculously survives and then seeks vengeance, albeit by lawful means, as he becomes a lawman to hunt down the vigilantes who nearly killed him.
Hi. Drop your gun belt, mister.
Hang 'em High was produced in part by Eastwood's own newly formed company, Malpaso Productions, named after a creek on his California ranch. Malpaso, meaning bad step. A self-deprecating nod to critics who thought he was making a misstep by going to Italy. This move behind the scenes signalled Eastwood's desire for control and careful career management. The film itself blended elements of his spaghetti western experience with more traditional Hollywood storytelling. It had the gritty violence and anti-vigilante themes that resonated with a 1960s audience questioning authority, but it also featured a more conventional moral underpinning. Cooper is determined to do things by the book, bringing men to justice in a courtroom rather than gunning them all down in revenge. Still, when push comes to shove, Eastwood's six-shooter speaks as loudly here as it ever did in Spain. Hang 'em High was a box office success, proving that Eastwood could carry an American western on his name and persona. In one memorable scene, his character faces down an angry lynch mob with a noose scar still visible on his neck, a powerful image of frontier reckoning that could only be carried off by the steely resolve Eastwood projected. The message was clear: the Western hero had changed. He might wear a badge now, but he was no spotless sheriff. He was a scarred survivor who dealt injustice with an edge of ruthlessness. Hot on the heels of that success, Eastwood tried something completely different, showing that he wasn't afraid to poke fun at his own Western image. In 1969, he co-starred with Lee Marvin in Paint Your Wagon, a big-budget musical Western. If the Dollars trilogy reinvented the Western, Paint Your Wagon turned it on its head and gave it a swig of whiskey for good measure. Eastwood, astonishingly to many, sings in this film, crooning a tune called I Talk to the Trees.
I can see us on an April night.
The movie's tale of gold miners, a shared wife, and a rowdy California boomtown was a far cry from the solemn gunfights of Leone's films. Despite the film's infamous reputation, singing cowboys were decidedly passé by the late 60s, and some critics were not kind to Eastwood's warbling, it actually did respectable business at the box office. Eastwood later joked about the experience with a smirk, but it demonstrated an important point. He was willing to take risks and step outside the laconic gunslinger mold, at least on occasion. After all, the Old West had its share of tall tales and laughter alongside the lead and gun smoke, and Paint Your Wagon tapped into that, however imperfectly. The early 1970s saw Eastwood continue to ride the Western trail, reuniting with a key mentor and testing the boundaries of the genre's tropes. In 1970, he teamed up with director Don Siegel for Two Mules for Sister Sarah. Siegel was a filmmaker Eastwood admired. He would later say he learned a great deal about directing from him. And their collaboration in this Western adventure added a new flavour to Eastwood's cowboy persona. In Two Mules, Eastwood is a tough gunslinger who encounters a most unlikely partner, a nun, played with feisty charm by Shirley MacLaine. The film's odd couple pairing, a rough mercenary and a prim, or perhaps not so prim, sister, provided gentle comedy and character chemistry
Nice to hear you laugh, ma'am.
amid the usual Western backdrop of bandits and battles, in this case, set during the French intervention in Mexico. Eastwood's character, draped in his serape and chewing a cigar, is initially as cynical and mercenary as his Man with No Name, until the presence of the nun brings out a begrudging decency in him. The movie ends with dynamite explosions and daring raids, proving that even when Clint dabbled in comedy or romance on the frontier, the six-gun and dynamite keg were never far away. By now, Eastwood had effectively taken ownership of the westerns he starred in.
Okay, get ready and go.
He was producing some of them, influencing casting and scripts, and always ensuring that the final product aligned with the image audiences expected from him. Two Mules for Sister Sarah did moderately well, though it wasn't a critical darling. It did, however, further demonstrate Eastwood's draw. Even a middling western was elevated by his presence, that cool magnetism that made audiences want to see him outwit villains or, as the case may be, gently flirt with a nun on the run. He followed this with Joe Kidd in 1972, a more straightforward western adventure. Joe Kidd paired him with director John Sturgis, famous for classics like The Magnificent Seven, and a script by acclaimed crime writer Elmore Leonard. Here, Eastwood played a former bounty hunter caught in a conflict over land rights between a group of Mexican peasants and a ruthless land baron. The film offered gorgeous New Mexico scenery, crackling dialogue, and of course, Eastwood in fine form, rifle in hand, delivering justice with a sardonic edge. Though Joe Kidd was not a blockbuster standout in Eastwood's career, it remains a solid entry that affirmed he could still carry a proper western, even as the genre was beginning to wane in popularity in the 1970s. As the traditional western genre started to slow down, audiences' tastes were shifting, and the once ubiquitous cowboy films were becoming fewer, Clint Eastwood was positioning himself to evolve yet again. He had another trick up his sleeve that would not only keep westerns alive, but would also mark the next phase of his career, stepping behind the camera and redefining the western hero on his own terms. The stage was set for Eastwood to transform from western star to western auteur, bringing with him all the lessons he'd learned from Leone, Siegel, and the frontier rogues he had embodied. By the early 1970s, Clint Eastwood had worked with some of the best in the business and was ready to direct his own films. If his Italian sojourn had taught him how to reinvent a genre, and his Hollywood returns had taught him production savvy, now came the moment to combine those lessons. In 1973, Eastwood stepped behind the camera to direct High Plains Drifter.
Maybe you think you're fast enough to keep up with us, huh?
Not faster than you'll ever live to be.
A western that bore his unmistakable stamp both in front of and behind the lens. High Plains Drifter feels in many ways like a ghostly cousin of the Leone films, but with an added layer of eeriness and brutality that was pure Eastwood. He plays a character known only as the Stranger.
Who are you?
Who rides out of nowhere into the isolated mining town of Largo. The townsfolk are desperate for protection from outlaws and hire this mysterious gunslinger, not realizing they've invited something far more dangerous into their midst. From the opening frames, High Plains Drifter announces itself as a different breed of western. As the stranger arrives in Largo, mirages shimmer off the desert lake and an ominous mood hangs in the air.
I don't remember lending my wagons to be shot by these goddamn fools out here.
No, you're gonna look awfully silly with that knife sticking up your ass.
Eastwood, the director, bathes the town in an atmosphere of sin and retribution. It's almost as if a spectral avenger has come to punish the guilty. Indeed, the film plays like a Western fable or morality play. Without giving too much away, it suggested that the stranger might not be of this world at all, but perhaps the restless spirit of a wronged man come back to paint the town red. Literally. In a macabre turn, Eastwood's character orders the entire town of Largo to be coated in red paint and renamed Hell in preparation for the impending showdown. This striking visual, a town literally painted the colour of blood under a menacing red sky, was a bold metaphor that no one but Eastwood would have attempted in a Western at the time. The violence in High Plains Drifter was unflinching and, to some, shocking.
Dave, is that you? Come on, we'll settle this!
The stranger metes out his own form of justice, and whether he is hero, villain, or something supernatural is left tantalizingly ambiguous. In one scene, he brutally whips a man, an unsettling echo of a crime revealed in the town's past. In another, he exacts a personal vengeance on those who have sinned, without mercy or remorse. This was Eastwood directly challenging the audience. Can you still root for the hero when he's as violent and vengeful as those he opposes? For Clint Eastwood, who had grown up idolizing classic Western stars like John Wayne, this film was a statement that the genre had moved into a darker, more complex territory. In fact, John Wayne himself famously hated High Plains Drifter. The Duke wrote Eastwood a letter expressing disgust at the film's portrayal of a Western town filled with cowardice, corruption, and savagery. That isn't what the West was all about, Wayne complained, saying the film misrepresented the pioneer spirit and the brave, hard-working people who settled the frontier.
You know what you are? Just trash. A bottle of whiskey for courage and the manners of a goat.
Eastwood politely responded that High Plains Drifter was not meant to be a literal history lesson. It was, as he called it, a fable. Different generations of Western heroes had different visions of the West. Wayne's was honourable and straightforward. Eastwood's was cynical and murky. The exchange between these two icons marked a symbolic passing of the torch. The traditional Western had ridden off and Eastwood's revisionist posse had arrived. If High Plains Drifter flirted with the supernatural, Eastwood's next great Western directorial effort grounded itself firmly in historical context while still carrying mythic weight. 1976 saw the release of the outlaw Josie Wales, often hailed as one of Eastwood's finest westerns. In this film, Eastwood portrays Josie Wales.
I'm looking for Josie Wales.
That'd be me.
A Missouri farmer driven to violence after his family is slaughtered by pro-Union militants during the Civil War. Wales becomes an outlaw guerrilla fighter, then a fugitive as he refuses to surrender at war's end. The film follows his journey westward as he collects a ragtag surrogate family of fellow outcasts, including a Cherokee elder, played memorably by Chief Dan George, a young Navajo woman, and a tough pioneer widow and her daughter. The outlaw Josie Wales is at once a bloody revenge tale and a surprisingly tender story of finding community amid chaos.
White men have been sneaking up on us for years. Took away our land and sent us here.
Under Eastwood's direction, Josie Wales is a charismatic blend of deadly and compassionate. He spits tobacco juice with uncanny precision onto the heads of dogs and the foreheads of carpetbaggers alike, and delivers terse one-liners.
You a bounty hunter?
Yeah, he's got to do something for a living these days.
Dying ain't much of a living, boy.
Dying ain't much of a living, boy, that became fan favourites. But he's also a man haunted by loss, reluctantly learning to live again through the trust and affection of the people who gather around him. In classic Western fashion, the film builds to a climactic showdown. However, in a rather unorthodox turn, Wales ultimately chooses mercy over vengeance when facing the man responsible for so much of his suffering.
My character in the Josie Wales had been completely stripped of all family, and it seemed as he goes along, he keeps building family.
That decision, a moment of hard-won grace, set Josie Wales apart from many revenge-driven Western plots. It suggested that even in an Eastwood Western, with all its brutality and rough justice, there was room for reconciliation and humanity. Critics and audiences responded warmly. The film's rich storytelling and character depth proved that Eastwood could direct a Western with as much heart as heat.
If you really have a story you want to tell and it's a good story, then you just tell it the best you can and you hope it finds an audience.
It's worth noting that the outlaw Josie Wales had a turbulent production. Eastwood took over directing early on, replacing the original director, an incident that stirred controversy in Hollywood. But whatever the behind-the-scenes drama, the end result was a triumph on screen. Some even likened Josie Wales to a folk ballad of the post-Civil War frontier, a tale of bitterness giving way to healing on the American plains. Eastwood's 1970s westerns also showcased an evolution in style and theme. He was increasingly interested in the historical reality of the West and how to subvert it. Josie Wales, for example, touches on the ordeal of Civil War guerrilla fighters, the plight of Native Americans, and the idea of personal honor versus futile war.
A movie can either be like a family or it can be a bunch of people at conflict with one another. But this movie, everybody liked the script, everybody liked their character, and everybody worked very, very hard.
And yet, it never preaches. It wraps these themes in thunderous gunfights, chases, and moments of wry humor, often courtesy of Chief Dan George's character, who gets many of the film's best quips. Audiences could enjoy it as a cracking adventure, or they could see the deeper layers Eastwood wove in. This balance of surface entertainment and deeper subtext would become a hallmark of Eastwood's later directorial efforts. By the late 1970s, the Western genre was on life support in Hollywood. Big studios were reluctant to invest in cowboy movies, especially after a notorious financial flop like Heaven's Gate in 1980, which nearly sank an entire studio. Yet Clint Eastwood, arguably the genre's last great star still standing, never abandoned the West completely. He flirted with it in offbeat ways. For instance, in 1980 he directed and starred in Bronco Billy, a modern film about a travelling Wild West show. In that charming, bittersweet movie, Eastwood isn't a gunslinger per se, but a contemporary man who plays one for circus audiences, keeping the spirit of the cowboy alive as a form of theatre. Bronco Billy was a love letter to the myth of the West, and perhaps to Eastwood's own career. In one scene, his character reveals a heartfelt respect for the cowboy code of honor, even as he acknowledges it exists in a world rapidly moving on.
You're living in a dream world. There are no more cowboys and Indians. That's in the past.
The film, gentle and humorous, showed Eastwood's willingness to deconstruct his tough guy image. It also hinted at an emerging self-awareness. Eastwood was conscious that he was one of the last purveyors of a fading genre, and he seemed determined to celebrate it even as times changed. But Eastwood wasn't done giving the traditional Western one more shot of adrenaline. The opportunity came in the mid-1980s when the genre had been dormant for several years. In 1985, Eastwood released Pale Rider, which marked a grand return to the Old West setting. Pale Rider is often noted as the highest-grossing Western of the 1980s, proof that even in the era of MTV and blockbuster sci-fi, a classic Western could still draw a crowd if Clint Eastwood was leading the charge. In Pale Rider, Eastwood plays a character known simply as Preacher.
He's our new preacher.
Preacher, huh? Hey, you messed up some of my boys, Preach.
Who wanders into a small California gold mining camp just when the desperate prospectors need him most. A ruthless corporate miner, a villainous land baron in the Grand Western tradition, is trying to run them off their claims, and the Preacher becomes their protector.
Comes hot from Sacramento, and it tells me I've got mineral rights to that whole damn keg.
If it was worth the paper it was printed on, you wouldn't be trying to bribe me.
The film intentionally echoes the 1953 classic Shane, with its story of a mysterious outsider defending homesteaders. But Pale Rider adds a touch of the supernatural too. Much like High Plains Drifter, there are hints that Eastwood's Preacher might be more than just a man.
This picture, he's like an emissary from somewhere to answer this girl's prayer, an emissary from wherever.
He appears almost summoned by a young girl's prayer and has a bullet-riddled past that is never fully explained. When he straps on his revolver and rides into battle, he is a relentless, near-invincible force. And behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, quotes a character from the Book of Revelation upon seeing the Preacher, underscoring the mythic, ghostly aura Eastwood cloaks his character in. Pale Rider is lush and reverent toward Western tradition. It captures breathtaking scenery, snowy mountain peaks, and timber forests, making it one of the most visually beautiful Westerns of its era. Eastwood's pacing is measured, almost elegiac. This is a Western that savors atmosphere as much as showdowns. When the action comes, it's sudden and decisive. In the climax, the Preacher takes on an entire posse of gunmen, moving through the enemy camp like an avenging wraith in a duster coat, armed with a six-shooter and a sledgehammer. In one memorable scene, he literally uses the hammer of justice on a would-be assassin. Audiences and critics noted that Pale Rider, while traditional in many respects, also carried subtle messages relevant to its time, including an environmental angle. The evil mining company is shown ravaging the land with hydraulic monitors, in contrast to the simple panning of the independent prospectors, and a feminist touch. A teenage girl becomes the narrator of sorts, and she's smitten with the Preacher's strength and kindness in a coming-of-age subplot.
There can't be anything wrong with making love either.
These contemporary undercurrents prove that Eastwood, even as he appeared to be making a back-to-basics Western, was infusing it with modern sensibilities. The film's success vindicated Eastwood's faith in the genre. He showed Hollywood that Westerns still had a pulse in the 1980s, provided they were made with care and anchored by a star who embodied the timeless cowboy mystique. Unbeknownst to everyone at the time, Pale Rider would be Clint Eastwood's last Western for a good long while. But it was not the end of his Western journey. The greatest chapter was yet to come, as Eastwood would return one more time to the saddle in the early 90s to deliver a powerful final statement on the genre that had defined him. In 1992, Clint Eastwood gave the world Unforgiven, a Western that felt like the culmination of everything he had been building toward. As an actor, as a director, and as a custodian of the genre. It had been 7 years since Pale Rider and westerns in general had once again faded from cinema screens. But Eastwood had been holding onto a particular script for over a decade.
This was in 1981. I took the script and put it in a drawer. In 1990, I realized I've still got this script in the drawer. Maybe I ought to take it out and look at it before I get too old to do it. So.
Waiting until he felt the time was right and until he was the right age to make it. That time arrived, and Unforgiven emerged as a late modern masterpiece, a film that won the Academy Award for Best Picture and earned Eastwood an Oscar for Best Director, not to mention a place in the canon of truly great westerns. Unforgiven is set in the fading frontier of the 1880s, and from its opening moments it presents a starkly unromantic view of the West. Gone are the larger-than-life showdowns and clear moral codes of classic westerns. In their place is a mud-soaked little town named Big Whiskey, and a story about violence, guilt, and the harsh wages of sin. Eastwood plays William Money, a character far removed from the invincible gunslingers of his past roles. Money is introduced as a pig farmer, struggling to provide for his 2 young children. He is also a widower, reformed from a youth spent as a notoriously vicious outlaw and killer. The memory of his late wife, who cured him of drinking and wickedness, hovers over him as a symbol of the decent life he's trying desperately to lead. When 2 reckless cowboys in Big Whiskey disfigure a prostitute and ride off unpunished, the victim's fellow working girls pool their money to offer a reward for someone to hunt the men down.
Maybe we ain't nothing but whores, but by God, we ain't horses.
This bloody incentive draws out the ghosts of the Wild West, including Money, who, despite years of trying to forget his violent past, is lured by the reward and the needs of his own family. He saddles up once more, joining his old partner Ned, Morgan Freeman, and a brash young would-be gunman called the Schofield Kid, to do one last evil deed for what they tell themselves is a good cause.
But what I liked about the story is that the characters all had a point of view. And even though he was the villain in the piece, he had a point of view. He thought he was right.
From there, Unforgiven meticulously deconstructs the mythology of the gunfighter, including the very legends Eastwood's earlier films helped create. The film's tone is somber and brooding, punctuated by sudden eruptions of violence that are quick, ugly, and painfully realistic. There are no stylish duels or witty quips when bullets start flying in Unforgiven. When a character is shot, he doesn't clutch his chest and dramatically drop dead on cue.
Slim, give me some water, please. I'm bleeding, Slim.
He writhes, he cries out pitifully for water, and the supposed heroes are left standing awkwardly, shaken by the horror they've inflicted. Eastwood uses these moments to lay bare the true cost of killing. In one quietly devastating scene, after a violent encounter, Money sternly tells the young Schofield Kid, who is rattled after making his first kill,
It's a hell of a thing, killing a man. You take away all he's got, and all he's ever gonna have.
"It's a hell of a thing, killing a man. You take away all he has, and all he's ever gonna have." That one line rings like a funeral bell, and it could well be Eastwood the filmmaker speaking directly to all the gunslinging fantasies of Western cinema. He doesn't say it with pride, but with regret. Throughout the film, we see how time and myth have caught up with the West. A dime novel writer, played by Saul Rubinek, flits around town, eagerly recording and embellishing the tales of anyone with a reputed past. First a boastful young outlaw, then the violent town sheriff, Little Bill Daggett, Gene Hackman. This character provides a commentary on how Western legends are made, often built on lies or exaggerations. In Unforgiven, Eastwood pulls back the curtain. The heroic Wild West we think we know was, perhaps largely a construction of writers like this one, turning ruthless men into folk heroes on the page. Little Bill, the iron-fisted sheriff of Big Whiskey, on the surface seems to be an agent of law and order, but he's as cruel and flawed as the outlaws he faces. Hackman's performance earned him an Oscar as well. His Little Bill is at once affable, building a house and chuckling about its crooked roof, and terrifying, brutally beating men within an inch of their lives to maintain his brand of order. There's a poignant irony in seeing Eastwood's character Money, once a figure of fear himself, getting beaten and humiliated by Little Bill. It's as if the film is saying no one is invincible, not even Clint Eastwood's archetypal tough guy. As Unforgiven barrels toward its climax, it does deliver a dose of the traditional Western catharsis. But even that comes with a dark, self-aware twist. When William Money finally takes up arms in vengeance, the scene is thunderous and gripping. It's the kind of moment that would have drawn cheers in a simpler film. The wronged gunslinger meting out justice to those who have wronged him and his friends.
And I'm here to kill you, Little Bill, for what you did to Ned.
But Eastwood doesn't let the audience off the hook so easily. The violence Money unleashes is not glamorous or righteous, it's savage, a reversion to the very thing he'd spent the whole film, and symbolically his whole life since marriage, trying to leave behind. In the rain-soaked night, with corpses at his feet and a shotgun in his hand, Money issues a warning to the townsfolk cowering in fear.
Any man I see out there, I'm gonna kill him. Not only gonna kill him, I'm gonna kill his wife.
Any man don't want to get killed, better clear on out the back. The old Clint Eastwood would have delivered that line with cool confidence. This older Eastwood delivers it like the snarl of a man who hates what he's become again. In that moment, we see both the terrifying outlaw he once was and the anguished soul he still is. It's a powerful, haunting end to the conflict, one that leaves viewers not with a cheer but with a knot in the stomach and much to ponder. For Eastwood, Unforgiven was deeply personal. It felt as if he was revisiting every gunfight he'd ever participated in on film and weighing it on a moral scale. He dedicated the movie to the memories of Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, his two great mentors, almost as if acknowledging that this film was, in part, a dialogue with their work. Leone had shown the West could be morally grey. Siegel had taught Eastwood efficiency and punch in filmmaking, and Eastwood now synthesized those lessons to create a Western that was elegiac and self-reflective. The title itself, Unforgiven, suggests that the sins of the past can never truly be washed away, only reckoned with. The film's epilogue notes that William Money likely moved away and made a quiet life for his children, perhaps running a dry goods store. It's a gentle send-off that denies the audience any mythic epilogue for the hero. No riding off into a Technicolor sunset. No statues erected in his honor.
I don't deserve this. To die like this. Deserves got nothing to do with it. I'll see you in hell, William Money.
Just a man who did what he did and then disappeared, perhaps trying once more to find the goodness his wife had seen in him. Unforgiven was showered with accolades and immediately recognized as a classic. It not only won Best Picture, but it also revitalized interest in westerns in the early 90s. Momentarily, at least. Other studios tried their hand with westerns like Tombstone and Wyatt Earp soon after. Many hailed it as the final word on the western genre, an epitaph for the era of cowboys and outlaws in cinema. Clint Eastwood himself hinted as much, suggesting that Unforgiven would likely be his last western, as he felt there was nothing left to say after that. For nearly 3 decades, he kept to that word, exploring other genres and stories as a director. Clint Eastwood's journey through Western cinema is a trail unlike any other. He began as a kid in a TV cattle drive, absorbing the lore of the Old West from the back of a chuck wagon, and he ended as an elder statesman of film, using the Western to hold a mirror up to our myths and histories. In the course of that journey, he didn't just star in Westerns, he transformed them.
I think of 43 years that I've been since I started out as an actor. And
he took the genre by the scruff of the neck and dragged it from the idealized vistas of John Ford and John Wayne into a new landscape where heroes could be anti-heroes, where morality was a tightrope, and where the gunfighter's legacy was as much regret as glory.